Okay, so I've been asked to give this Sekai talk this evening, which is an explanation of the precepts talk. I'm going to give this talk tonight and tomorrow night as well. So the Bodhisattva Precepts, which we've just chanted, are the 3 pure precepts and the 10 grave precepts. So tonight, what I want to do is give a brief overview of how these precepts for both lay and ordained people became the foundation of our spiritual vows as Bodhisattva practitioners. And then tomorrow night, I'm going to talk about the relative and the esoteric meaning of the Bodhisattva precepts. So at the end of these 3 days, the end of the Jukai, you're going to receive a Homyaku-e, which is a chart of the perceptual blood vein of the Buddha's ancestors. And this document signifies that you have repented your past karma, taken refuge, and agreed to follow and uphold the precepts as best you can. And it is also a verification that you are now a child of the Buddha. At the bottom of this document, the lineage document, is an inscription that is added by the transmitting teacher to their disciple at the time the disciple receives Dharma transmission. So I want to be really clear here is that you are not receiving authorization to teach, or when you are nor are you receiving authorization to confer the precepts. What is written on the bottom of the Homyaku is a confirmation or authorization of the person who's transmitting the precepts to you. So if we look at the bottom of the Homyaku that Dogen Zenji received, Dogen Zenji, the founder of our school, from his teacher, Tiantong Rujing, here's what it says. On the 8th day of the 9th month of the 1st year of the Pao Chang era of the Sung Dynasty, which is 1225, the late abbot Tiando Rujing, who lived from 1163 to 1228, he instructed the precepts of the Buddha are the vital matters of the school. In the past, the masters of Mount Gurdwara, or the Bolcher Peak, Shaolin, which was the temple of Bodhidharma, Shaoqi, which is the temple of Weining, the 6th patriarch, and Mount Tong, the temple of Dongshan, transmitted these Dharma Sila precepts of the Tathagata to their successors, generation after generation, until they came to me. Now I transmit them to you. You should receive them in deep faith and not permit them to be discontinued. For this I earnestly pray. So that's what was written on the bottom of Dogen's Homyaku. So within this passage that's on the bottom of his Homyaku, Dogen is actually listing a history of our lineage of the perceptual bloodline of Soto Zen from Shakyamuni Buddha to Rujing to himself. The lineage chart on the Homyaku shows a red perceptual bloodline from Shakyamuni down to, in this case, your name, which will be at the bottom of the document. And the bloodline then goes way back up again to the very top, which is Shakyamuni said. So it circulates through all of these names and then comes right back up to the top and continues to circulate. It never stops circulating this perceptual vein of the Buddha. The precepts of the Buddha never stop circulating. This is the Buddha's lifeblood circulating. It's the lifeblood of our school. And it continues throughout time, being, and space endlessly. It is the living perceptual transmission of our vow to benefit all beings. Now, in the Suzuki Roshi lineage, I received my transmission, Kechimyaku, from Hakuryu Sojin Weitzman, Daosho, in 2004. So the Kechimyaku that I have, in the bottom it reads, Monk Hakuryu Sojin Daosho, in the inner room of Zen Mountain Center, that's Tassajara, affirmed and revealed to me that the perceptual vein of the Buddha is the one great causal condition of our lineage gate. Personally, passed from Buddha at Vulture Peak through Bodhidharma at Shaolin Monastery, the sixth ancestor Wei Ning at Paolin Monastery, Dongshan Daosho at Puli Monastery, Tianlong, Juqing Daosho at the Qingtai Monastery, Eihei Dogen Daosho at Eheiju Monastery, and through Shogaku Shinryu at Zen Shi Monastery, thus mutually flowing both ways, eldest to eldest. Now I entrust the precepts to you. So you can see that the bottom part of the Kechimyaku that I received at Dharma transmission is longer. So, because obviously more time has gone by between the time that Dogen received his and I received mine. Okay, so this Kechimyaku presents a kind of history of the perceptual bloodline through the Zen masters who were the major transitionary figures of our lineage. And they are Shakyamuni, who transmitted to Mahakashapa, then Bodhidharma, who brought Zen to China, who transmitted to Weika, Taiso Eka, if you want to know the names in Japanese, because we recite the lineage, Taiso Eka, who continued the lineage in Hongren, Daimon Konin, who transmitted the teachings to the sixth patriarch, Wei Ning, Daikon Eno, and Tanshen Ungandoyo, who transmitted to Dongshan, Tozan Ryokai, who's credited with starting the Chaodong or Soto school in China. And then finally down to Tendo Tenjiang Rujing Tendo Nyojo, who transmitted the precepts to Dogen Zenji, the founder of our school in Japan. So the document itself is the body of Buddha. It is the transmission of the vital energy and the vow of all transmitted practitioners, passed from master to disciple, and then continuing on master to disciple, disciple to master, all the Buddha ancestors in our lineage. And then at the top of the document again is a Buddha's head, and the bottom are his feet. So this perceptual bloodline is our family of practice verification, together with the Buddha Dharma. It's this living, unstoppable interconnection of the warm hand to warm hand bestowal of these most important teachings. So even though the lineage documents, the Kechimyaku document doesn't list women, and it doesn't list many of the men who are our ancestors, they are still present with us. So please don't dismiss this bloodline because it does not conform to our ideas about fair play or inclusion. This is a family genealogy. We may not know all of our ancestors, personally. We may not know all of our ancestors in our personal families, but that doesn't negate their contribution to our genetic heritage. So we know from scholars that part of this lineage is an historical fiction. Furthermore, our school of Buddhism, as have other schools, modify the events that happen to match their understanding of the Buddha Dharma. So even though this is true, let's take a look at the stories behind the Zen masters who received this transmission that Dogen lists in his Ketsumiyaku. Mahakashapa, Bodhidharma, Hueki, and Huining, the sixth ancestor. So those are the ancestors I'd like to talk about. And all of them, interestingly, had something to do with the creation of what we now call the Bodhisattva Precepts. So Dogen specifically refers to the transmission of the precepts to Mahakashapa in the Shobogenzo fascicle called Denne, which means transmission of the robe. Dogen wrote that Mahakashapa, he said, he was one of, quote, those with the opportunity to directly obtain the precepts with the welcome of Shakyamuni Buddha and the Buddha instruction on the way of the Buddhas. Okay, so this expression, to obtain the precepts through the welcome, refers to how Shakyamuni would welcome a monk and ordain them. And when Shakyamuni Buddha said welcome to someone, automatically their beard would fall off, their hair would fall off, so they become bald and completely shaven. And an okesa would miraculously appear upon their body. This was their ordination. And so this is the opportunity to obtain the precepts with a welcome. So here you can see that Dogen's making this connection between the Bodhisattva precepts, the ordination, even all the way back to Shakyamuni Buddha. So in a way, this is a kind of a fiction about the Bodhisattva precepts, because we know that Mahakashapa, when he received the welcome from Shakyamuni Buddha, he was going to be following what's called the Vinaya vows. But in Keizan Zenji, as we know, was one of the founders of the Soto school in Japan. Keizan Zenji, he wrote in the Denkuroku, the record of the transmission of illumination. He wrote about this: when the world honored one said, "Welcome, Bhikshu," Mahakashapa's beard and hair instantly fell out, and the kesa dropped itself on his body. Then the Buddha said to him, "I transmit to you the pure eye of the Dharma. May it spread far and wide through you. Do not let it perish." So that's what Shakyamuni said to Mahakashapa. Now in Shukkei, another fascicle of the Shobogenzo, Dogen, called Leaving Home, Dogen wrote, "It should be clear that the attainment of the way of the Buddhas and ancestors is only by those who leave home and receive the precepts. The vital artery of the Buddhas and ancestors. To see a Buddha, to see an ancestor, means to leave home and receive the precepts. Mahakashapa, following the world-honored one, sought to leave home in the hopes of delivering beings. When the Buddha said, 'Welcome, Bhikshu,' his beard and hair fell off by themselves, and a kesa clothed his body." Whenever someone studies the Buddha and is liberated from existences, the outstanding examples of leaving home and receiving the precepts are like this. So you can see from this quote that for Dogen, receiving the precepts is extremely important. Now, here Dogen clarifies that Mahakashapa's transmission included taking the precepts from Shakyamuni Buddha. In this case, Mahakashapa received the Vinaya precepts, not the Bodhisattva precepts, and which are the ones that we receive today. But I'll speak a little more about this in a minute. Okay, what are the Vinaya precepts and how do they relate to the Bodhisattva precepts? And this is kind of important background information, I think, for understanding the history of this. So there's a story about Mahakashapa that Dogen tells in the Faso Gyoji, continuous practice, which shines the light on the sincerity of his practice when he was an old guy. One day the Buddha suggested to Mahakashapa that he eat food more conducive to sustaining him in his old age. So it was customary at that time to give more frequent meals to the elderly because monks at that time only ate once a day at noon. So as you got older, they would give you more food. And they did this for the sick and the infirm, the older people and those who were sick. So Mahakashapa said, no, I don't want to do that. He said, I must continue the practice of the 12 dutta. So the 12 dutta, as the word is translated in Pali, is limbs of scrupulousness, austerities, or aesthetic practice. So according to the Buddha, these 12 dutta practices were used to tame anger and greed, and they actually weren't intended to be adhered to for the whole time. They were used as kind of specific antidotes to anger and greed. Although in this story, with the Dogen tells, it sounds like Mahakashapa continued to carry on these austerities all the time as a permanent practice. So here are the 12 austerities. 1, only eat food one gets on begging rounds and not by invitation to a lay person's house. Only live in the mountains. Acquire one's clothing in a burial ground. Live in a tree or a field. Take 1 meal a day. Never lay down. Only sleep while seated or walking. Only own 3 robes. Meditate upon the dead and isolate oneself by staying in a cemetery. Avoid people and seek solitude. Eat fruit, then rice during a meal. Only sleep outdoors. Don't eat meat, ghee, or anoint the body with sesame seed oil. Okay, so these are the 12 austerities. So, these rules sound really strict. And some of them are also part of the vows taken by monks who are ordained under the strictures of the Vinaya or discipline or rules that monks were taking, that were created by Shakyamuni Buddha. And Mahakashapa also followed these vows, these Vinaya rules. And these rules are still used today in contemporary communities, monastic communities, both in the Theravadan and the Mahayana schools. In Soto Zen, monks are not priests, are not ordained under the Vinaya rules. Rather, they adhere to what we call the Bodhisattva Precepts. So, in Zen, both ordained and lay followers receive the same Bodhisattva precepts. And since this talk is a history about the development of the Bodhisattva precepts, it's helpful to know something, I think, about the Vinaya ahead of time. As I said before, which predate the development of the Bodhisattva precepts, which came to predominate our ordinations. So the Vinaya precepts are refer to monastic regulations for monks and nuns. And there's several versions of these rules depending on the school that they came from. But basically the rules were developed by Shakyamuni Buddha for the ordained Sangha. So what would happen was a monk or nun would do something that was required clarification from the monastic rules. And Shakyamuni would step in and he would hear what the problem was, and he would decide or let people know what he thought was the appropriate behavior in this situation. So there are 3 sections of the Vinaya Pitaka, which is called the Vinaya. And one is the vows, which are over 250 for monks and over 350 for women, for nuns. These are called the Pratimoksha vows. And then the second part of this, these rules would be the explanation of how the rules came about. And then the third part are essays on things like ordination, retreats, using medication, robes, including instructions for rituals and ceremonies. Okay, so the Pratimoksha vows, which are the vows that are taken, they start with 5 vows on morality, and they are basically the same as the first 5 vows listed in the Bodhisattva Precepts. Refrain from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, false speech, and using intoxicants. So that should be familiar to us as the first 5 of the Bodhisattva vows. And these vows were taken by lay members of the Sangha. Novice monks took another 5 vows: not eating after noon, not using perfumes or other adornments, not singing, dancing, playing music, or going to other entertainments, not sleeping on a higher luxurious bed, and not handling money. So that was the added rules for novice monks. And then the fully ordained monk would be following over 250 rules. And these more extensive rules are divided up into subsections, which concern things like how you wear your robes or what robes you wear, how you can get around your transportation, how you engage in conflict resolution, where you dwell, what your duties are, and also the punishments for violating these rules. So I wanted to give you a couple examples of these stories from the Vinaya. And this is from the Pali Canon. Now, this translation I used is from Rears, Davis, and Herman Ohlenberg, which was done in 1900. So it's a pretty old translation. But you get the taste of the idea of what these stories are about. Okay, so one example is that Buddha and Ananda came upon a sick monk who was lying on the floor, and he had soiled himself. And they asked him if any of his fellow monks were taking care of him, and he said no, nobody was taking care of him. So the Buddha and Ananda, they cleaned him up, put him on his bed, and then after they'd done that, the Buddha called together the rest of the community, and he asked why they had not taken care of this monk, and admonished the Sangha to take care of each other in the future. And the Buddha then created a rather extensive list of criteria and situations for taking care of sick community members. So here's another example, which I picked because it's rather dramatic, and I think illustrates a rather extreme sincerity of the bhikshus, or the monks, in these stories. So there was a monk who went to town. He had rather long fingernails, so he must have had really long fingernails. And he went to town, and he was making his alms round, and a woman came up to him and she said, you know, I want you to have sex with me. And because he was following the rules, he said, no, I'm not going to have sex with you. And she said, well, in that case, I'm going to scratch myself as if I were you with your long fingernails and make it look like I had sex with you. And so she did that. And the townspeople, being on to her, said, no, that didn't happen. So the monk went back to the monastery and relayed this story to his fellow monks. And they were kind of concerned about, like, what should they do? Because the monk said to him, well, why didn't you cut your fingernails? Is basically their response. And but he didn't. And then they went to talk to the Buddha Shakyamuni, and they said, well, what should we do in this situation? So Shakyamuni said that the monk should cut his nails and that no one should keep their nails long. Furthermore, if they did not cut their nails, they were guilty of causing suffering to other people. Okay, so I'm paraphrasing this. So the translation continues, relating how the monks reacted. And here's the translation. Now, at that time, the bhikshus tore off their nails with their teeth or rubbed them down against the wall until their fingers were bleeding. Then they asked the Blessed One what they should do. He replied, I allow you to cut your nails with nail cutters. I have to say, I think these guys are a little dense. But anyway, he said, I allow you to cut your nails with nail cutters. Then they cut their nails down to the quick and their fingers were hurt. In response, the Buddha tells them their length should be shorter than the flesh on their fingers. So they shouldn't hurt themselves by doing this. Then we find out that the monks are using nail polish to polishing their fingers and their fingernails. And the people in town noticed this, and they were critical of the monks for doing this. So they said about the monks, they said, if you polish your fingers like this, it looks like you live in the pleasures of the world. And then the Buddha told them that they could only clean their dirt from under their nails, but not polish them. And so it goes on like this. Now, for us, these sound like ridiculous on some level and quite painful and rather over the top. The point of these stories is to say that whenever this kind of thing happened, the Buddha would intercede and he would make up rules or suggestions about how people should respond. So we don't know, whoever wrote these rules might have exaggerated to a certain extent. So I think we should take that into account. But the rules themselves had a couple of purposes. And one of them was to strengthen the practices of morality, which is called sila, their concentration or samadhi, and wisdom prajna. Since these three aspects, morality, concentration, and wisdom, worked in concert with each other to bring about liberation. So this side about these rules created the best conditions for working with these three aspects of training. And then to create a standard of behavior for the whole community that would create harmony among the monks. And also their relationships with the laity, which was really important because Theravada monks depended on the generosity of the lay community for their sustenance. So variations of these ordination precepts are still followed by lay and ordained people today, depending on the school of Buddhism that's being practiced. And this would include Mahayana sects as well. And I'll tell you a little story about this, a modern day story. I don't know, maybe late 1980s. Jocko and I were living at Tassajara, and we went to a monastic conference at Spirit Rock. And so there were monastics from the Tibetan tradition, the Theravadan tradition, and the Zen tradition. I particularly ran into a lay person who told me that my ordination didn't count because I hadn't taken the Vinaya ordination. And therefore, the Bodhisattva Precepts, these 10 precepts, were a lay ordination, so I wasn't really truly ordained. Needless to say, I was not thrilled to hear this from him. But as the conference went on, parts of it were interesting, because when we were not included in the speakers, we'd just, been ordained for a few years. We were not included in the speakers, but the speakers who did come, there were some Theravadan nuns who spoke. And the guy who was running the audio was a man, and in the Theravadan tradition, if you've taken the Vinaya ordinations and you're a woman, you're not supposed to be touched by a man. So there was one woman, a nun, who was really going out of her way, like moving away from this person who was trying to put the microphone on her, the front of her robes, in order to be able to mic her for this. And because she was strictly following the Vinaya precepts of the Theravadan school, which means school of the elders, the Theravadan school, it was kind of awkward. And then a woman who was a nun who had taken the Vinaya precepts that were associated with Mahayana school, she just allowed them to put the mic on her, even though she'd taken very similar ordination rules. So I think that kind of highlights the difference in this particular instance of maybe a little more wiggle room in the Mahayana understanding of taking these precepts, and that of those of the Theravadan tradition who are very strictly following these Vinaya rules.